And I think the first questions that I have is for Vermont, and it says, how reasonable or possible do you think it would be to provide a kit of simple materials that will allow the students to perform variations on laboratory techniques on their own kitchens or something like that? I agree that hands-on is the best way, perhaps the only way, to learn lab techniques.
I mean, like, for those experiments that we did, I think, like, for example, for the enzyme kinetics and the vitamin C, those are probably not easy to provide because, you know, the safety of the chemicals that you used for those stuff has to be considered. But I think, for example, the last experiments that we did was on pigments. So the pigments experiments are just extracts of food. And then they can play, you can give them like a vinegar solution or a baking soda solution to show, like, for example, the effects of pH on the color of the different, on the changes on the color of the pigments. But I think what's important to mention is, like, we have to consider the safety, at least, of the chemicals that are going to be used, because you just can't play like a lot of chemicals at home, unfortunately. But if everything are food grade, I think at least here in our department we have like a fund to provide the students with a kit. And I think some of our faculty have provided students with intake home kit, like, for example, in food microbiology, if I'm not mistaken.
Could I add a comment here? There's another aspect of it when you're doing distance learning. If students are all on campus or close by, then you can provide the kits. But we have students all over the world and all over the state, some of which have to drive maybe 3 hours to get to class. I thought about setting up some kits for some of my experiments, and students told me they're not able to do it. In addition, we found that during the pandemic, when they're all at home, especially taking courses asynchronously, many of the students got part-time jobs, which also limits their ability to drive to campus to pick up the samples. There's another aspect, very practical, which we all have to think about, and that's the budget. So if you're going to make kits for every student in the class going out, you know, to maybe 40 students, that's a lot of money. And most of us probably don't have budgets to be able to handle that. Not that it gives excuses to not doing it, but it's still a consideration.
Thank you. I would like just to add regarding that, for example, in our department, we have like a wine tasting class that the first time it was canceled because it was impossible. The first semester it was impossible just to do it, you know, in a short time, just to transfer to online. For the second semester, this class, they decided just to do these kits because it was just for the students just to try wine and learned about the sensory of each of those wine. And the department prepared kits for each of the students, and they delivered the kit to the students' houses. So that eliminate, of course, the need for the students to come to pick up the kit, but the budget went to the roof, right? And so the department said, you know, we do this year, but this is something that we cannot sustain, you know, for the class, unless that, you know, the fee, the student fee just to pay for this course increases substantially just to cover for those extra expenses. So yes, I agree. It's a difficult decision and hard decision just to make. I have another question, and this is now for you, Karen. How did you collect such good feedback on your slides and presentation materials?
I have an open door policy. Yeah, it increases demands, but I encourage my students from the very beginning to constantly give me feedback. When they don't understand something, they can email me directly. So yeah, every week I have, you know, sometimes 10 or even 15 emails coming in. And then if it's a question that I think is relevant to the entire class, I post it on the learning management system. Right now we're on Sakai, but I post the answer to that question there. And if it is something that is germane to the management of the course, I make corrections as we go along. One of the things I didn't, and then at the end, what I did in my course evaluation was design an evaluation that specifically dealt with the online issues. The difference between if you're in class and online and what your responses are and what got in the way and what didn't, and constantly solicited then their suggestions for how to change things.
Thank you, Karen. I would like just to follow up with you now that you are there. I don't know if I missed this during your presentation, but so basically you converted your PowerPoint presentation or your slides, you converted that just to a Word document, and that's what the students got from you?
Yeah, no, I didn't convert because I've always used only my Word documents. I've always used my course notes to do the presentations, even when I did it in class. Although a lot of my colleagues make all of their course notes in PowerPoint mode, what I found from students and what I found in going back to my own course notes from graduate school to build my original teaching notes, I found there were so many times that I had a figure that people talked about and I had some notes on it. Students can't write as fast as the professors can talk. So there were a lot of times I found my course notes were incomplete. And then I found that students were missing concepts. So over the years, I've moved from a more outlined version of notes to more and more detail in my notes. And so I use my notes on the screen, whether it's in person or online, all of the time. A lot of my colleagues took course notes and then did it the other way around, which is why, and when we had best practices training at Rutgers, they said, take your course notes and reduce them because students can't see all of this. So reduce the content. So it's a direction that I think is opposite good learning. So I wanted to put that out because I know a lot of people just use PowerPoint slides. But what I found constantly is students don't listen very well. So if you're depending on them getting information just from what you're talking about in class, they're going to miss a lot. So over the years, I've gradually added more and more and more detail to the notes so that I can talk about it in class, but then if they miss it, they can go back and read it in the notes. They're always going to have access to the important information. And people say, oh, you can't look at that much online, but if you use a large pointer so that you're constantly guiding students to where you are and what you're talking about, they see it, they'll focus on it. Your eyes only look at a small portion of the screen anyway, so they see that. But in addition, I found that presenting this way reinforces information. You know, they tell you when you give a talk, tell them what you're going to show them, and then tell them what you showed them. And that's basically what you're doing. You put the notes up, you go through and you're showing them and you're talking about what you're going to be doing, but they see that page and they can remember you talking through that page and what you were saying. And then when they go back and read the notes on their own, they're reinforcing what they saw initially in class. So I'm trying to get them to revisit the same material and imprint that information on their minds, which increases neuronal pathways and they remember it better.
Nuria, if I may add to that, what I've done even before the shift to online classes, because I really like to write on my slides when I lecture, whether it is in person, online, or in hybrid. If it's PowerPoint, I write on my slides. If it's like on the board, I write on the board. Just like if it's in my tablet, I write on my tablet. So what I've done is like, even before the shift to online, it's like when I've written something, which I always do, every single lecture, I will post an updated lecture notes with all my handwriting onto the slides. I know it's like an additional task to do, but I think it will take like about 5-10 minutes
Yeah.
to scan the slides again and then post everything again in Canvas. So that way the students know like what are the key important points that were discussed during that particular lecture.
I want to make a comment too. I think in Karen's way, if you don't have a standard textbook, having a detailed slide and with a highlighted area, that's very helpful. But my own teaching, I tend to use very brief slides, and I ask students to print out the slides, bring to the classroom. I teach in person this semester, and take a note on the slides. So to me, that's my own experience too. So I hear and I write on the slide. So multi-sensory type of activity that will help me remember better. So I ask students to write on the abbreviated slides. So when I tell application story, when I tell anything, they would do their own highlighting and taking note that way. So I see the advantage of both. And that's with my class, if I have a textbook, doing it that way is it's easier. I mean,
Yeah,
just to keep students engaged in class.
I should clarify, I don't have a textbook that I think works for my course. So I've had to develop all of the course notes. What I give them is the only thing that they have. I do give them a list of reference material and encourage them to read beyond. Some of them do, some of them don't. But what they learn I have to provide everything that I want them to learn. So it's led to adding more and more details.
Thank you. Lillian, you have a question, right, or a comment?
Yeah, because I like that this transition from slides to notes, because I find that interesting because I do the opposite. I'm just wondering, I think part of the question has been answered. If you have a textbook, will you get the same kind of learning if you use the notes in the textbook and then highlight, this is what I want you to, you highlight the structures. I mean, of course, the textbook, let's just say Fenneman, it doesn't have the visuals, Karen, that you're showing them, but you can show them the products. So you highlight, because I think the key is to prevent the scheme and such. That's what you're trying to prevent and provide the full picture by you providing the notes. So I found that interesting, the fact that going away from slides to notes. So I was just wondering, with the textbook, can you do the same thing if you found one that you liked?
Sometimes when I see things in other textbooks, I incorporate them into my notes with reference citations and everything. It's harder to do it with textbooks because then you have to scan the page to be able to project it. So you can still deal with it. What I find is that most of the time my students are weak in chemistry, and especially if I'm dealing with chemical reactions, just to put the reaction up, their eyes kind of glaze over. They look at it, So I find it very helpful. And my students have told me that my approach helps them learn organic chemistry better. I take the reactions apart. Yeah, it's extra work for me to be able to draw out the reactions. But if you put in color the functional groups that are moving, then they learn the chemistry as they go along, which is why I do it. When I put it up just blank, everything was black. They saw the words, but they didn't learn the chemistry. And so they didn't learn it as well. I think everything that we try to do, we have to adapt and ask students what helps them get it. One of the reasons why in addition to my own experience for staying on the pages, but when I've talked to students about it, they've often complained to me about other classes where they have just PowerPoint slides and they get 1 point per slide. And yeah, they say, okay, I have to memorize this, but they don't see where it connects. They don't see how it fits with everything else. And I find by using full pages, they can begin to see the flow and the connections and the interrelationships between information better. So if you can do that by using your textbooks, that'll work. You just have to guide students through it so they see where they're going with it.
Thank you, Karen. I think Laura Laura, you were talking about some a tool that can be
Yeah,
used. Can you
a fantastic tool that exists to help kind of bring everybody together is something called the skeletal outline. Ooh. But it's from the Association of College University Educators. I put it into our Zoom chat, and perhaps Lauren or someone could post it out on the main interface. But it's just a great tool, and it can connect everything that you all are talking about. It's an example of one, and I highly encourage you just to even consider introducing it for one of the sticky points, I always call them sticky points, in your class that students are constantly asking you questions about this one particular module or week, and just see if it works. It helps students listen, or when they're reading, they can jot notes on it. It's just another way to create those connections.
Thank you, Laura. There is a comment from the platform, and it says, I am not an academic, but I give presentations and webinars, and I try to keep the slides uncluttered, but make full notes. And then I give a PDF handout of the PowerPoint notes pages, which show the slides and what I have said in the panel below. What do you think of that?
Well, I like that. I think it's just all on how people interact with it. There's something called Universal Design for Learning. I put it in one of the bits out on the main platform, but Universal Design for Learning, everyone in this space right now, everyone that's listening, we all have different ways that we appreciate hearing and knowing and exploring and identifying. So just finding that way is really important. But what I'm hearing you say is that when you're giving a webinar, you're showing the slides, but the other way that the people can interact with it is to be able to read what you had posted. I think just as long as we're providing the information and then letting people know on how they can use the resource is the key.
Thank you, Laura. Now that you are there, I have a question for you.
Okay.
When you started talking about, when you have when you're streaming, your lecture or your class or a presentation, and then normally in my particular case, I ask the students to share their screen, which so I can see them and just not to feel, that I'm talking normally by myself or to the wall. It doesn't happen, so maybe 10% of the students at the beginning, you have a large amount of students that they are on the screen, and then over the times and over the other classes, at the end up with 1 or 2 students sharing the screen and just their names after. So I like your idea of requesting at least the picture of them, because it's hard for me just to get to know them also, right? I don't know their faces, so that helps me a lot. But also I was wondering if you can give any tip on, this is not only about me seeing faces, it's only about participation. I have noticed that they are not as much engaged. I have tried several things, just to make them answer questions. And even sometimes when I use techniques just to break the ice, and make them talk about something totally different than the class, even though I find that their participation is so low compared to when we are in class, right, in person. So do you have any other idea, any tip of how can I improve that, how to improve my connection?
That synchronous engagement. So on the web page, the CELT-Engage page, towards the very bottom, I think there's 4 blocks, one of which is synchronous strategies, another is asynchronous, I think equity online. But one of the challenges, letting your students know that you will be asking them to engage in different ways. If they're choosing to have their camera off, which in many cases, if you've done the research or if you've talked to people, depending on where they're learning, right, they may not feel comfortable having the space. Like right now I'm coping with a dog right here. But it's one of those challenges that we have, is helping those students do that. So what kind of activities, doing those kind of quick pulse synchronous feedback activities so that you know that they're paying attention is a big
Okay.
piece of it. Doing polls, utilizing something like an audience response system that is similar to Top Hat. So at our university, we have something students pay for. It's a Top Hat. You can ask quick polls and you can see if they're participating or not. But making sure students understand what that is and then why you need that to happen. A part of it is making them aware that it helps you to teach better, right? To be able to engage with them so that you know that they are beginning to understand the information and so on. So just taking advantage of those synchronous type activities, whether it be polls, utilizing those the reaction bar or the feedback bar if you're in WebEx. But it's finding those simple ways to get those interactions, but letting students know that it will be happening, but not where it is in your synchronous session, right? So they have to pay attention. And that's a other piece, going back to doing videos, doing an introduction video at the very beginning. And then each time that you have a synchronous session, just saying, I just want to have an announcement. Just want to make sure this is what we're going to be talking about today. I will be doing a feedback activity that I hope you participate in. And this is why, ... It helps me to know that you all are learning whatever we're experiencing together right now. I want to make sure that I connect with you. How can we do that unless I know that you are understanding and knowing? So, and I had a question. Someone had said, can I get a copy of slides? I know Lauren and the AOCS team, my slides are up on the platform website next to my agenda piece. So you can click and download it easily. Just to let
Thank
you
you.
know.
Nori,
Thank you,
Could I offer a counterpoint to this? The other side of the story?
Yes.
And part of the way I designed my online courses was in reaction to webinars that I attended over the summer. You know, we are at home, so you say, okay, I can take advantage of all of this. And I found everything that I didn't want to do in class. And my students have come back and told me a lot of them have the same reactions. When you use, whether it's Zoom or WebEx or whatever, there's so much stuff on the screen that they find it distracting and it's hard to keep track. If you have everybody's pictures up and then you have the chat bar on the side and you have all of the Zoom bar on the bottom or the WebEx controls, what's left for the presentation is a very small box. And it's extremely difficult to see if you're putting very much material. So, and my students have also told me they don't want their pictures up. They don't want people seeing them. And they don't want to have to look at everybody else. So they turn off the bars. So then why worry about it? I found I can follow the participants on my bar. I don't know whether they're watching it or not, but at least I know that they're on. So I encourage my students, in order to have maximum exposure, to not worry about the other stuff, to use full screen projection. So they're watching everything that I'm showing instead of seeing all of the extra stuff. And so they're not distracted by it. Another thing they've told me is they don't like the little pop quizzes, the questions and stuff that come up that everybody uses as kind of gimmicks for participation. They feel it's disruptive. So there are two sides. And when you do it in class, it's more of a regular flow because you're walking around and you're talking and you're keeping them stimulated. When you do it online, you stop the flow of information in order to put that up, and many of my students don't like that. So, you know, we do what we can to try to encourage participation, but sometimes maybe it doesn't work.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so we are going just to hold the rest of the questions of comment just to the second panel, because now we have just our time constrained to our next speaker.